So the other day, I was contemplating doing a video on my top 10 board games that I would keep if I could only keep 10 of them. And as part of the prep for that video, I decided there were a couple I needed to get to the table and play to see if they really met the criteria, whatever that was, of being in my top 10. And I started to do that, and I put up on a table game number one that I was considering, spent maybe 45 minutes or something setting it up. It was a little bit heavy to do that. And then I couldn't get playing and I took it down. And I thought, well, maybe it's the day, whatever. So the next day I did the same thing with a different game, put it up, spent at least 45 minutes, maybe longer, putting it all up, making a character. I just could not start to play. And I don't know why. The reasons for that are many and probably possibly the subject of a different video. But while all that was going on, I was thinking in the back of my mind, well, what are the 10 essential RPGs that I have if I could only keep 10 of them? And that's not something I think about probably as much because RPGs, and at least in my house, just are more books on the shelf. And I have tons and tons of books, and that's not an issue. Games, of course, are a different story in terms of storage and space, and so I'm always more actively thinking about what games I could or should get rid of. But it led me to think about what are the 10 RPGs that I consider essential to my collection, and thus this creation of this particular video. So before we get into what these games are, I want to say a couple of things, make a few points about it. Number one, this is a list. It's not a ranking. So it's going to be alphabetical, and there are 10 games, and they will be presented alphabetically. I will talk about the reasons why I think it's part of my core collection, and also anything particularly unique that stands out to me in terms of being a solo player. For the most part, maybe in almost every case, these are not specifically solo RPGs. So I'm choosing really traditional RPG rule sets, all of which can be soloed, I think, very easily, and most or maybe all of which I have presented as solo on the channel. I've created a playlist that will contain any original videos I've done on any of these systems. So you can go to that playlist and see all the videos that I've done for these various games. The other point is that in certain cases, I'm going to be showing you a bit of a bundle of material that I have for the game, including whatever solo supplements that are specific to the game that I may have. If you watch my channel at all, or if you've bought my book, you know that oftentimes, mostly, I prefer to use kind of generic supplements, generic oracles and things, rather than something that's created specifically for a system. But in certain cases, I do have specific solo support for the systems that was built, created for the system itself, and I will show you there what I have. And the other really important point I want to make is that what you're not going to see in here are anything like D100 Dungeon, 2D6 Dungeon, any of the pen and paper dungeon crawls, or even realm crawls like 2D6 Realm or D100 Space that are in that exist. To me, that's a different category of game entirely. And while definitely I think we call them RPGs, or maybe we call them pen and paper games. I don't know what they're called, just probably dungeon crawls. I'm making a distinction here and not including anything that is dependent on the player mapping out with a pen and paper their game, and that the mechanics of the game or the integral to the game is not the pen and paper mapping. To me, those are different. So there's not going to be any Kernathalis. There's not going to be, as mentioned, any D100 Dungeon or any games in that ilk. and they're just in my mind a sort of a separate category of games, and I love them all and I would keep them all, just for the record. And then finally, the last point to make on this is that I noticed there's actually a spread here. I wasn't trying to do this intentionally, but it's certainly weighted in favor of kind of what I would call a generic fantasy, but there's other things in here too, and it's not just fantasy. Maybe just about half of the list falls into that category. So with all of those points in mind, we're going to get to my alphabetical listing, not a ranking, of the 10 essential RPG systems that I would never get rid of, even if I got rid of everything else. It is fitting that the first book on the list, the first system on this list, is also, I think, the oldest on the list. The AD&D DM guide, and indeed the system itself, is so important to my gaming, my understanding, I would say, of what RPG is and how it works and how it can be repurposed for solo play, as well as how I, as a GM, can run a game. And I did an entire video just on this book, so I'm not going to repeat everything there, but one of the things that's so amazing about this book is the inclusion of this random dungeon generation, and the random dungeon generation for solo play in particular, which originated in the strategic review from 1975, I think. I also have a video on that specifically. So you have actual dungeon generation solo rules in here, but more than just that, you have the basics of the philosophy of role playing and the relationship between the game and the rules and the interpretive nature of what is meant to be gaming. And I think for all of us, whether we are regular GMs or especially soloists, it's important to bear in mind what types of fundamentals were laid down in these, in these foundational texts about changing the rules and the malleability of play. I also find this book interesting because in its specificity, the wall climbing table, the feet per second of climbing, the degree of detail in it, I think as a GM, it's very useful to think about how you want to create your own stories with varying level of detail. So you may go into a room and, for example, and delineate very specifically, even down to inches, like what might be in a desk or on a wall, whereas other things maybe are completely glossed over, like travel from one section to another, or the prior 500 years of history of the environment to get you where you are with the particular monarch that's causing trouble or whatever. And I think it's the kind of telescoping in and out that is, and the feeling of comfort with telescoping in and out that is important for effective GMing. And I think the foundations and basis of this can all be understood here in this book. And just as a, foundation for understanding what kind of classic, and I'll call it generic, not in a bad way, but classic fantasy gaming is for RPGs, of course, there's nothing like this. And you have everything from these very detailed combat, which you may never actually play, but it's interesting to understand and think about what aspects of combat you want to put into your game, and what aspects of combat, whatever rule system you're using, picks up, and what you might add to or subtract from. And there's also information here about town and city social structures and thinking about that. And there's sample dungeons and really everything and more. There's intervention by deities here. Again, the concept of having something, whether you use it or not, in your game world about a higher power or forces beyond the PCs operating or not. And then, of course, there's tons of treasure here and things that you can read about and put into your own rule sets, or if you're not actually using this rule set, just pages and pages of that, artifacts and relics, so much stuff. There's ways of, so here we cut to the appendices with the random dungeon creation, as well as random wilderness, some basic rules for that. Again, all things that can be so easily repurposed. Random monster tables. You could probably just work from this book as a supplement to any other rule set you might be using if you weren't using this rule set. So that is key and essential in my collection. And I'll just show you along with this. I had planned to do a video on this, but I never actually did. These are the Holmes rules, and I'm not going to get into the whole history of what these are, but there's a lot of videos that explain that, but boiled down, rules for the basic set, as well as this, somebody has made Blue Home, which are rules sort of based on the Holmes rules and clarified and sort of cleaned up. And then yet another person has created the series of tables and things. You could see the credits here to further understand Holmes Basic, and it's basically like a reference sheet. There's a character creation worksheet if you want to go in the work actually with these rules. And then, but what I really like here is like all the spells are on one page. And again, whether you're using this rule set or not, it's great to have as reference. And you have equipment for the adventurer, different abilities, and monsters. They're all keyed, so you could randomize this yourself. And then there's also some pre-generated characters. So there's actually a lot more here I'm not actually showing you, but so these are all part of my collection, broadly speaking, for a D&D or the original D&D. Obviously something that is going to be one of the 10 that I would keep. And next up we have Fallen. This is by Perplexing Ruins. It is described as Baroque and Grim Fantasy Tabletop RPG. And we'll just look here at the beginning how the setting is described, the time frame. It sits somewhere in the historical precedent of the early modern period, generally speaking, Euro-American 1600 to 1850, influenced by the clash of superstition and knowledge, folklore and science, and of faith and independence. And it is, well, let's see, there's a note here also. There are enough tools in this book to allow the solo player to embark on their own journey. And indeed, there are, even though it's a regular RPG. What I love about Fallen is the combination of the kind of rules light nature and the fact that it is in this non-fantasy kind of like loosely Euro-American colonial-ish time period with the folklore types of monsters and things, and the nature of just the environment being inherently dangerous and haunting, and everything about it just fits really well together. There's a lot of random tables. The system is a light one. There are also some solo adventure. So I have this solo adventure. I haven't honestly played this, but there's this solo adventure. Then there's this City and Adventure supplement, which I have definitely used, and I may have actually used it when I did a demo of this in the video that I did. There are a bunch of kind of different types of oracles that you can use that are paired with words as well as images. And there are, as you can see here, a lot of tables to create your story, to create an environment. And there's even more in this campaign notebook, where you have various tables, D88 tables, looting the body, common things, magical things that you can find, and then tables that will actually also generate various types of encounters for you, wilderness, dungeon, settlement. So you're getting an entire kind of world and structure through these random tables that's not just limited to a dungeon, but of course, if you want dungeon mapping, you have that as well. And you have the words to suggest different types of themes for your ruins and your delving sites. And overall, it's a game that, I mean, I hate this expression like oozes theme, but that's really what it does. It really involves you in this world, and with a very minimalistic prompts allows you to develop a world that's outside of a fantasy world. We have 100 Curious Curios here, so the space is maximized, the amount of tables are maximized. There are, in addition to what I'm showing you here, there are some great cards available, and these cards are sort of like oracle cards. You can pull them and get the suggestion of just different words. We have yes, no here at the top. We have some words at the bottom. We have these imagery that you could use, and just pairings of words. So these can be pulled in as a type of oracle. There were also released some cards that are going to be your enemy cards. And again, you can just get a real feel for how the theme comes through with the art. And then there's also some equipment cards here. And again, you don't need these, but it just adds to it. And it really feels like a self-contained game in a very light rule set. I would say the base rules, and then for my style of play, I love having the possibility of a city and these cities adventures. These two together are really great, and if you pair them with something like these card oracles, it's a very neat package and definitely something that would be in the 10 I would keep.
All right, so next up, I want to talk about Forbidden Lands, and this is Rogues and Raiders in a Cursed World from Free League. And the first thing about it is that it comes in a box, and that might seem irrelevant or superfluous or just silly, but there is something. I think it was the first RPG, this is from 2019, that I had that came in a box, and it really emphasizes the gaming aspect of role-playing gaming. And as I've talked about in my book, especially for soloists, I think focusing on gaming conventions in when doing solo RPG can be super useful. And by that, I mean, you could read the book, but by that, I mean things like a sequence of play or component parts, or thinking about a little bit more structure that you can impose on the session that might help, especially if you are playing solo. For regular RPGing, of course, I think the same philosophy applies, but maybe for different reasons, like just kind of keeping the fun in it. And I know that sounds maybe counterintuitive, but I think we've all probably been in RPG games where it seems like some of the fun might have gone, and maybe that's the fault of the GM or the rule set, or the expectations. But in any case, having this in a box, I think, helps sell it as a gaming experience. I have GM'd this for kids, and the fact that it's in a box is super helpful. So what comes in the box, you get the player's manual, the GM guide, the Legends and Adventurers booklet, which is super key, and this map. And I think having the inclusion of the map with this set, as well as this Forbidden Lands Legends and Adventures, is great. This is these are random tables, and it helps you create different legends for your world, as well as backstory events for characters. It's not intended for solo play, but it is super helpful for the soloist, and I think for the regular GM as well. There's a brief monster generator here. Everything in this rule set, and honestly in a lot of the materials with similar mechanics that Free League puts out, is what I would say I would call clean. easy to understand and use. Here's the player's handbook. Again, lots of just even the layout is very easy to understand. There's description about the characters, and so you're getting a little bit more than just stats, that everything is presented with a kind of little bit of a narrative about what it means and what it does. This is a kind of grabbing a handful of dice type of mechanic, and I don't know that I explicitly said this at the beginning of the video, but the purpose of this video is not to talk about mechanics of these rule sets, because in the end, from my perspective, that's way less important and really doesn't factor into why I would keep something or not. It is a function of the game and not the reason behind the game. The GM guide here has everything that you would expect in a GM guide. List of monsters. There are gods in this game, the various kin that you could play, lots of artifacts. You get some settings here, adventure sites, and the adventure sites are also listed in such a way that you can give as much or as little history to them as you want, what its purpose was, why it was built, and then some kind of legends and things that may be associated with it, and NPCs and things in the case of this castle. So it makes things super easy for the soloist. I saw a couple of, these must have been a couple of, as I said, I played this a bunch, and I'll just show you. Here's a character sheet, and I saw a little drawing of a character here. We'll see who this was. Yeah, so this was a while ago that we played this, as you could see from the drawing style, but it is suitable to play with some modifications, I think, with pretty young kids. And then, right, there's the map. And you get a map. It has stickers that you can use to make it kind of a living map. I think I did actually use a couple of these. You have some sites and some maybe dungeon entrances, as well as a whole map here that I'm not going to open up completely, but it will, if you want to, allow you to use the indications on the map as part of your story and get up to speed really quickly on presenting something to players with an environment. And as you know, if you watch my channel, I feel the environment is like the single most important thing, even more important than a rule set, to have an effective session and to really, there's some good characters, to really understand what's going on. So this game, as you can see, allows for sort of a lightness of play. I also have the wonderful Book of Beasts here, and these are more enemies, but what's great about these monsters is they all come with a d6 table of attacks, suggestion of the type of terrain they'll be in. There is a description of them as well as a random encounter for them. So you get, for really everything, a little bit of support for how you might use that monster. And I do believe somewhere here, here, we'll look at that in a second, I believe there's also a table in here that randomizes them for you. You get some weather tables, and you get, I think this is like lore tables. So basically you are getting in here, and these are specific random encounters. I think there's maybe 36 random encounters, and you can also have them by terrain. So what this is giving you is also a mirror of what the book is giving you. It's a full-fledged situation. So you're not just getting like a list of beasts, you're getting them in the context, the type of attack they might do, the way you might encounter them, as well as the terrain in which they may be. And then there are some solo rules here that, to be totally honest with you, I forgot were even in here. They are giving you some backstory for your character, and maybe a procedure of play and a hex procedure as well. And I must have covered this when I did this coverage on this game, but I really forgot that they were in here. So You get some theme prompts and a basic oracle. So this is coming in the Book of Beasts. And then you get names for a character. And it looks like you can pull cards if you want to randomize the names, as well as some traits. There is also a setting book, the Blood March. I'll be honest, I haven't really used this too much in my play, but it gives you, it's a campaign module for Forbidden Lands with travel rules, new monsters, and some adventure sites that you can play in any order. So if you want to pick up a setting, a pretty well-defined setting, you have that as well. But essential, the box and the Book of Beasts, I think, absolutely one of the 10. Now, this next one, if you recognize this book, is For Against Darkness. And you may be saying to yourself, if you watch the video from the beginning, hey, I thought you said you weren't going to include For Against Darkness, because you definitely said you're not including pen and paper type of games like D100 Dungeon or 2D6 Realm, etc. Well, I didn't mention not including For Against Darkness because I knew I was going to include it. And the caveat here is that I'm including this as a non-solo game, as something to use as source material for running a game and GMing a game for others. So I've done so many videos on this game system. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, and I'll put the playlist up so you could see that as well. But as source material, I just grabbed a few books off my shelf. I think I have about 27 books in this system. They are absolutely fantastic to use as source material to run games. And especially, again, as I tend to GM for kids or maybe for friends who don't have a lot of role-playing experience, the characters are easy to create and understand. If you have enough of the source material, you have different ways of going from a darker setting to a lighter setting. They are even detailed foes, like you could have a whole long thing about who this octopus man is, for example. And if you have enough of the books, it serves as just great source material for a light RPG. In at least one of the books, and I don't remember which one, there's an explicit discussion of like, if you want to run this as an RPG. So it's not like it was out of the creator's mind. And maybe it's even in the original book. I can't be sure. There's everything. Just you can look from the cover to see the different type of flavor you could get from going to any of these source books as aspects of your session. And it is, you get the cities one, I absolutely love. Even the Troublesome Towns volumes that have come out, which I've talked extensively about these and how I think they do and don't work, but to just pick and choose from them for things to put into your story. It's like you could just put a ton of Post-it notes on here and run somebody through a bunch of encounters and have something practically pre-made for you. So for a GMing a game, it's like doing a lot of the prep for you. And as such, I think it meets the criteria that I had for this game, for this video, where I'm not talking just about pen and paper dungeon crawls. I don't think you need that for this if you're running it as a GM. So that's For Against Darkness. So Ironsworn is the game system that I went back and forth most about in terms of including on this list. And the reason why is that when it first came out, I think it really shook up the RPG world, especially those who play solo or with very small groups of people, because it offered co-op play, guided co-op and solo play. It did it really uniquely, and the stories that it allowed, or the stories that it prompted you to tell, were very grand. And the concept of an iron vow and living up to some big promise that you make to a community, to a country, to a world, to a higher power, whatever, was baked into the system. And it also offered something beyond the traditional kind of fantasy world. As you know, if you play this game, a sort of, I guess, I don't know, Norse adjacent kind of setting. So it was and still remains, I think, extremely influential and important. The oracles that were here in guided play are very useful in terms of not just being like a simple sort of yes, no, we have these action and theme oracles. Again, I don't know if the designer of this was the first to introduce them. It's certainly how I came, I think, how I came to see tables like this for the first time. And the date on this printing is 2018. The so it in that regard is incredibly significant. When Delve came out, Delve brings you down into the dungeons, and it still is, and the date on that is 2020. There still are bigger things at work here, bigger forces at work, I guess, for lack of a better word, but it does make it a little more grounded in terms of having a traditional or perhaps more approachable type of situation where you could just be going through a dungeon and encountering monsters and looking at finding relics and treasures and things of that nature. But they're still the larger setting of what your site is and what the history about it is. And you can see with this solo thing, we have features, aspects, and focuses, site name, descriptions. I love all of this. And in considering the video, I realized I need to get back and try to do another delve in the Ironsworn setting to see how it goes. My hesitation on including it in here is that I found as time has gone on, it's something I turn to less and less. That what made it so great, what makes it so great, the sort of reaching for something larger, the concept of these vows that you're fulfilling, and that there's a bigger situation at work than just your character, can make it a little bit daunting, I think. And it feels almost, I don't want to use the word oppressive, but I'm saying that word to suggest like an obligation, I guess, to kind of live up to a rule set. And the basics of the mechanics here are great because you have this concept of how successful or not you are. And then if you are in the middle there, it gives you the opportunity to bring in, well, what is the partial success? What is the partial failure? And that is just a great mechanic that, as we'll see later on in my list, other people have taken up and used and works super well. But on the other hand, it sometimes feels like the further away I get from the initial release of it, it feels like something not easy enough to pick up and play. However, I am including it because I think it is a brilliant game design. I think it does something that is not done really by any other of the RPGs on this list at all. It really is a game apart, I think. You can put in the comments if you think there's another system that is as different from all the others as Ironsworn is from all of these others, but I can't think of one right now, despite the fact that some use a D6 system, some use D20, there's different resolution mechanics, but conceptually and as it plays out, I think Ironsworn is in a league of its own, and as such deserves a place on my list. And as I said, it is causing me to recommit to when I do something new next, I'm going to do an Ironsworn delve because I think that is more approachable to me than setting out on a whole perilous quest. But a perilous expedition feels more approachable for me. So Ironsworn delve has a place on this list. So as on the fence I was about including Ironsworn in this video, I was firmly aware that I would include Knave, and in fact it probably was one of the games that came to mind first when thinking about doing this video. I have been a fan of Knave since the Maze Rats days, where it the sort of predecessor to Knave, and I also have I think this is the first version of Knave that I had just in PDF form. It's hard to make sure that this is it. You can see right away, just from looking through it without even any detail, all of these random tables that are in this game. And indeed, as the designer Ben Milton says in Knave, we're going to look at the designer commentary here, that it began as a hack of basic D&D for an after-school gaming club for fifth graders to streamline, rationalize the rules, etc. Random tables. Much is often made of whether a game's rules are good, but in my view, the actual content of the game often has a bigger effect on the experience than the mechanics. I completely agree. Knave's random tables, which expand upon the tables from Maze Rats, aim to make creating game content a fast and even entertaining process. Completely does do that. And then the other thing of significance here, Knave has no classes, allowing players to determine their PC's niche by the abilities they improve and the gear they carry. So those perspectives and content of the game really carry through. You could see all the random tables here. This is the second edition of Knave, and there is just a great ease at play when you have all of these random tables, whether you are running this as a GM, which I have done, or playing with it solo. You have cities and you have the dungeons and you have just tons of details, books, clothing, fabrics, all in a very short rule set. The rules of magic here are great because you can create your magic by rolling on some tables as well, and then there are also spells built in. This is a smaller version of it. I think this is the not the second edition, but even you could just see in the layout of it here that there are just a lot of options, and they are accessible options. We have here the 100 level list spells, and this is what a character sheet might look like. So it is obviously rules light in that regard. I think if you are looking for something that is comprehensive but not overwhelming, Knave is something definitely to consider. As I said, it has flexibility for solo play. There's not any specific solo rules here, but with all the random tables and with like a very basic probability table, like my go-to probability table, you have all you want or need to play this solo. So Knave is absolutely in the bag of 10 that I would keep.
So obviously, or perhaps not obviously, Mork Borg is definitely also on the list. And I think, like what Ironsworn did mechanically in terms of being a disruptor, Mork Borg did aesthetically in terms of being a disruptor and presenting a game that is an aesthetic artifact as well as is a piece of art in and of itself, I think, in my opinion, as well as living up to the design. The promise of the game lives up to the design. Well, sorry about that. The promise of the game, what I was saying, lives up to what you are seeing in the book. And again, not going to go through the mechanics of this game, but it absolutely presents something different. And even just this book alone, I did my first video that I did on this system predated any of the solo supplements that have since come out, and which I do have the Solitary Defilement and Alone in the Crown is another one that presents some city rules here. Alone in the Crowd, and the Feretory, which has some more beasts and some trinkets and things. The these adopt the Ironsworn mechanic to great effect, I think, in terms of giving you the types of outcomes that you get, which is a combination of like direction but also flexibility, and do that quite well. So I think these are essential, the oracles, even as a GM. I've never GM'd this game for a group, but I would like to. It's slightly intimidating, but as a solo game, it's phenomenal. And I actually was thinking of returning to it on the channel and doing another one. I also have some of the individual settings that a sewer setting, a dungeon setting. I've never really played with these, but I think they came in this packet that I received as a nice donation from a viewer way back when. I also purchased another third-party supplement, Creatures of the Dying World. These are just a bunch of creatures that are created, and again, even just to kind of read through it, it gives you a feeling of a world, and the gameplay certainly matches that feeling. And then I have this little supplement here as well, which is more city materials, Cities of the Dying Land, and some random tables to create a feeling of cities. So Mork Borg is absolutely distinct in, I think, the pantheon of RPGs. Of course, there's been a lot of imitators, not in a bad way, but imitators that have come after it. But to my knowledge, this is the first game system where the book itself is, just looking at it, opening it up, gives you the environment, the feeling, the theme, the sense of the kinds of struggles that might be in the world. And then the content of that book absolutely supports that style of gameplay. So one of my favorites is Mork Borg. And now we're going to go solidly out of fantasy or fantasy adjacent. And we're not going to Traveler, but we are going to Mothership, which it amuses me to keep inside my Traveler box. I've been meaning to do a little presentation on Traveler on the channel, and I may well do that. But right now I'm just talking about Mothership, which is also on my list of 10 to keep. And the rest of this box is actually Traveler, but I love the way this all fits together. So Mothership. This is another one where I have struggled mightily with the game. The original game I purchased was the Player Survival Guide, which ended up being not what was now, I think, the first edition. This came with a whole bunch of confusion, omissions, errors, and things that if you watch my video on it, you could see some of my frustration. I talk about some of my frustration with this game. I think it was also really sort of marketed and sold hard at the time, and then a revised edition came out. I don't have a physical copy of the revised edition. I have only a digital copy of it, and for my style of play, that makes it hard. So I've been toying with the idea of purchasing another physical edition, but part of me just doesn't really want to do that. In any event, why is it on the list? Well, it's on the list for a number of reasons. First of all, what it does do well, it does really well, which is this sci-fi horror vibe. And I don't play a ton of sci-fi games, but when I do, there's two things I like in sci-fi the most. One is this sci-fi horror, and the other is almost the opposite end of that spectrum, which would be like sci-fi pulp. And this does sci-fi horror really well. And there isn't a lot that does sci-fi pulp very well. The only game, and the game that I love, that does that is 4 Against Mars, which does not make this list because, again, it doesn't meet the criteria. This is a pen and paper by the designer of 4 Against Darkness. Sadly, this game has been basically abandoned. This is the only published book for it as far as I can tell. I have, in the couple of videos that I've done on this, put out a wish that this wasn't abandoned and more was developed, because I think it's so, so good. And in fact, I am just about in the middle of starting a whole other game of it, and I made my little town here, the town Moonlight, and I'm starting to play through it. But that's a different, it's not going to be a video, but that's just another that's an aside. If anyone watching this video has made third-party content for 4 Against Mars, please message me because I would really love to have it. But back to Mothership. So sci-fi horror, if I'm going sci-fi, is another way that I want to go, and this is very compelling also. The design of it is great. Unfortunately, with this version, it didn't quite live up to the gameplay. But it's here because I received a while ago and have also done a video on this 1000 Empty Light. This is for use with Mothership. This is for solo operators by Alfred Valley. And as I said in that video, and as I will say again, this is one of the most well done, involving, just conceptually, visually beautiful modules I think I've ever played for any system at all. And you could get some example of it with even just this Oracle page here. And it also came with this manual of operations here, which has some information that actually ends up being useful, as well as this card that is going to be just visual types of prompts. And I believe this also came with it, and I don't think I actually ever used this. When I bought Mothership originally, I also bought this first, I think this is the first kind of module for it, the Dead Planet, and it does have a lot of great stuff like D100 Nightmares and things of that nature. And the final thing that has been published for Mothership, at least that I have, is this Hull Breach, and this is volume 1. Hopefully there will be more. It's campaign frameworks. There are different things here. There are various settings and modules that you can play. There is a wardenless section that has a toolkit for running Mothership without a warden. It's kind of designed for like co-op play or 2 players. It's not specifically like solo with 1 character, but it is quite useful, and a whole bunch of missions and locations, as well as some entities, some enemies, and some assets. So the new gear and things. Here are the prompts for the solo play that uses a card deck. It is, as a whole, and I've also done a video on this, as a whole, there's a ton of useful content here. I don't think Mothership is the easiest to play solo, even with this support. So Mothership is here because of the content. I think if I were going to try to do a sci-fi game as a GM, this would be what I would turn to. I know there's lots of qualifiers there, but really it's this solo module by Alfred Valley is just, it's an absolute gem. For that reason, Mothership is on my list. And Alfred, if you're watching, I wonder if you're doing something else for it. Please let me know. And we're getting toward the end here, alphabetically speaking, that is. We come to Shadowdark. Shadowdark is a stripped-down version, basically, of D&D. It's a D20 based system, and it is, I've done, again, a bunch of videos on it, including one about the reasons why I think it's great for solo, but it's not solo designed. It is familiar to people who play D&D in terms of the stats and the modifiers, and it just basically strips everything down in a good way. And what I love about it is that it's self-contained here. You can find everything you want in this one book, including a range of types of adventures here, an adventure generator, NPC generator. We also have a bunch of different types of encounters and terrains and areas. If you were truly playing solo, you would probably want to supplement this a little bit, probably even as a regular GM supplement it, but you get a lot of suggestion here, and it would be, I think, very easy to put together an adventure evening with just this book. And you have a lot of enemies and monsters. You also have your own monster generator, and it's just extremely pared down and simplified in a very nice way. There are absolutely a ton of other rule sets that do this similar thing, but I like this package, and I like the presentation of it. Even just the kind of open nature of the design, I think, speaks to the open nature and easy nature of getting this to the table. We have different types of treasure here. as well as a possibility for designing magic items and things of that sort. Now, there is a little supplement called Shadowdark. This is, I think, the only thing about this that's a little disappointing. I think there's kind of a little bit of a miss here in terms of, I appreciate the fact that something was put together, but I think if you're looking to it really for solo support, you're not going to really get too much. There are a little discussion here, how to modify some rules and some examples, but basically a lot of it is referring you to other sources. I mean, it's fine to refer you to Shadowdark, but you're also referred here to things you may not have, like Knave, or the Universal NPC Emulator, or the Gardens of Yin, or Axbane's Deck of Many Dungeons. I mean, that's not going to be helpful to you if you're actually looking for solo support and you don't have those things. So I appreciate that gesture. And then we've got, a whole double page spread of piece of art, but and then double page spread of dungeon names. I'm not really sure how this qualifies as neat, solo support. So I feel like a lot of it is not exactly what you might want. This is the Oracle. Again, nothing too special here. We do have a double page spread of verb and noun prompts. That's always appreciated, but essentially that's kind of what you get, I think, for the solo support. So I can't necessarily recommend this if you're playing solo. It doesn't offer much more than, say, for example, something you could find in just this table here and any other type of solo generator, whether it's just from any other source, truly. But Shadowdark itself, as a game, if you want to stick with a kind of D&D related but simplified rule set, especially for players who perhaps don't know too much about role-playing games and want to play D&D but want it simplified, this would be great. And definitely for solo, even without using what's in Shadowdark works super well. And then finally, alphabetically, the last on my list, Silent Legions. Might be the only game you're not totally familiar with on this list, a game of supernatural horror by Kevin Crawford. Kevin Crawford's name may be familiar to you as the designer of Scarlet Heroes, which is a game that is not on my list, but we will talk about that in a moment. Silent Legions is a basically kind of Lovecraftian adjacent game. And as the author says at the outset, it's different from many existing Lovecraftian games in that it is designed as a sandbox toolkit for the GM. So it really does work for, I think, creating an entire world and having all the types of things that you get in a Cthulhu type setting, but with what I think of as kind of Kevin Crawford's very forward-looking Scarlet Heroes, with its solo and GM-less tools, was published in 2014, forward-looking types of tables that allow you through random rolls to create settings and goals and things that will happen, and building up an entire world from a few different types of prompts. And so as that toolkit, I think it works very well for somebody wanting to run with just one book a system in a whole world that is perhaps unfamiliar to and very different from the traditional fantasy world. And so we have things here, how to run a conflict scene or an ambush scene. It is a great toolkit in that way, what a challenge could be for a scholar. And you could see, obviously, without my stating, how this would work solo so well. And of course, I did do a video on it demonstrating some gameplay. And so you can go to the playlist associated with this video to see the more of the details of that. I think it just does this all so super, super well. So why don't I have Scarlet Heroes on the list? Because Scarlet Heroes was really one of the very first books that incorporated, you could see, well, you can't see because it's cut off, but 2014 is the publication date here, where we have this entire section on solo gaming. And in fact, I return to these oracles quite a bit and have a bunch of them printed out in my solo RPG wallet. That are the things that I go to time and again, and ton of credit goes to the designer here for this inclusion of this in the main book. The reason, and I am just taking some time to show you because it's absolutely worth, obviously 10 things as an artificial thing for the purposes of a video, but if you're serious about gaming and getting into solo gaming and you don't own Scarlet Heroes, it is definitely something to consider, because you could see how there are all these structures, and these tools are useful for really any type of rule set. And in fact, were they published separately, I think that would be something that would do very well. So there's a publishing idea for the designer. In any event, it's not included here because I think there's a couple of reasons. One, there's a specific setting here, the Red Dawn setting, which is not exactly traditional, what I think of as kind of traditional high fantasy. There is it's in a different world, and to really make use of the enemies here, you need to kind of buy into that world, and that's not something that I find myself doing too often, using actually the actual rules from this actual game. The solo support 100%, but the enemies and the setting here, which is a kind of a big part of this, not so much. So that's part of the reason why I do see that I have printed out even these rules separately, or at least some of them. So that's the reason I'm not including Scarlet Heroes in here. But it's certainly, if I was doing a history of solo RPGing, this is factors extremely prominently, because the designer was very well ahead of many in making a game that included and indeed celebrated the solo gamer.